Chapter 4. Poetry in general seems to have sprung from two causes, each of them lying deep in our nature. First, the instinct of imitation is implanted in man from childhood, one difference between him and other animals being that he is the most imitative of living creatures, and through imitation learns his earliest lessons. And no less universal is the pleasure felt in things imitated. We have evidence of this in the facts of experience. Objects which in themselves we view with pain, we delight to contemplate when reproduced with minute fidelity, such as the forms of the most ignoble animals and of dead bodies. The cause of this again is that to learn gives the liveliest pleasure, not only to philosophers, but to men in general, whose capacity, however, of learning is more limited. Thus the reason why men enjoy seeing a likeness is that in contemplating it they find themselves learning or inferring, and saying perhaps, that is he. For if you happen not to have seen the original, the pleasure will be due not to the imitation as such, but to the execution, the coloring, or some such other cause. Imitation, then, is one instinct of our nature. Next, there's the instinct for harmony and rhythm, meters being manifestly sections of rhythm. Persons, therefore, starting with this natural gift developed by degrees their special aptitudes, till their rude improvisations gave birth to poetry. Poetry now diverged in two directions, according to the individual character of the writers. The graver spirits imitated noble actions, and the actions of good men. The more trivial sort imitated the actions of meaner persons, at first composing satires, as the former did hymns to the gods and the praises of famous men. A poem of the satirical kind cannot indeed be put down to any author earlier than Homer, though many such writers probably there were. But from Homer onward, instances can be cited, his own Margits, for example, and other similar compositions. The appropriate meter was also here introduced, hence the measure is still called the iambic or lampooning measure, being that in which people lampooned one another. Thus the older poets were distinguished as writers of heroic or of lampooning verse. As, in the serious style, Homer is preeminent among poets, for he alone combined dramatic form with excellence of imitation, so he too first laid down the main lines of comedy, by dramatizing the ludicrous instead of writing personal satire. His Margits bears the same relation to comedy that the Iliad and Odyssey do to tragedy. But when tragedy and comedy came to light, the two classes of poets still followed their natural bent. The lampooners became writers of comedy, and the epic poets were succeeded by tragedians, since the drama was a larger and higher form of art. Whether tragedy has as yet perfected its proper types or not, and whether it is to be judged in itself or in relation also to the audience, this raises another question. Be that as it may, tragedy, as also comedy, was at first mere improvisation. The one originated with the authors of the dithyramb, the other with those of the phallic songs, which are still in use in many of our cities. Tragedy advanced by slow degrees. Each new element that showed itself was in turn developed. Having passed through many changes, it found its natural form, and there it stopped. Aeschylus first introduced a second actor. He diminished the importance of the chorus and assigned the leading part to the dialogue. Sophocles raised the number of actors to 3 and added scene painting. Moreover, it was not till late that the short plot was discarded for one of greater compass, and the grotesque diction of the earlier satiric form for the stately manner of tragedy. The iambic measure then replaced the trochaic tetrameter, which was originally employed when the poetry was of the satiric order, and had greater affinities with dancing. Once dialogue had come in, nature herself discovered the appropriate measure. For the iambic is, of all measures, the most colloquial. We see it in the fact that conversational speech runs into iambic lines more frequently than into any other kind of verse, rarely into hexameters, and only when we drop the colloquial intonation. The additions to the number of episodes, or acts, and the other accessories of which tradition tells must be taken as already described, for to discuss them in detail would, doubtless, be a large undertaking.
Summary and reflection of Chapter 4.
In Section 4 of The Poetics, Aristotle explores the origins and development of poetry, identifying two fundamental causes deeply embedded in human nature. The first cause is the instinct of imitation, inherent in humans from childhood. This instinct, Aristotle argues, sets humans apart as the most imitative of living creatures, learning their earliest lessons through imitation. The pleasure derived from imitated things is universal, even when the originals may be viewed with pain. This pleasure, Aristotle contends, arises from the inherent joy of learning, whether for philosophers or the general populace. The second instinct Aristotle identifies is the innate affinity for harmony and rhythm, which gradually led to the development of poetry. People, starting with this natural inclination, hone their specific abilities, and from rudimentary improvisations, poetry emerged. The direction in which poetry diverged depended on the individual character of the writers. Serious spirits imitated noble actions and good men, while the more trivial sort focused on imitating meaner persons, initially creating satires. As poetry evolved, two distinct classes emerged, those who wrote lampooning verse and those who composed heroic verse. Homer is acknowledged as preeminent among poets in this serious style, as he combined dramatic form with excellence of imitation. Homer laid down the main lines of comedy by dramatizing the ludicrous without resorting to personal satire. Tragedy and comedy, as art forms, initially developed from improvisation. Aeschylus and Sophocles played pivotal roles in shaping tragedy, introducing multiple actors, scene painting, and expanding the scope of the plot. Whether tragedy has perfected its proper types and how it should be judged, whether in itself or in relation to the audience, remains a question. Aristotle notes that tragedy underwent gradual advancements, finding its natural form after passing through numerous changes. Aeschylus and Sophocles contributed significantly to these advancements, refining the structure and elements of tragedy.
Practical exercises.
Writers. Write a short story or scene using the technique of imitation, experimenting with capturing the essence of characters and actions through detailed and vivid description. Create a dialogue-heavy piece, focusing on the colloquial and iambic elements to mimic natural conversational speech. Composers. Compose a musical piece that reflects the evolution of emotions and moods, mirroring the gradual development of poetry described by Aristotle. For example, try to compose a piece of music imitating the style of someone you admire. Experiment with different musical measures to convey a conversational tone, drawing parallels between musical composition and colloquial speech. Dancers. Choreograph a dance that traces the evolution of characters, capturing the essence of imitated actions through expressive movements. Explore dance styles that mirror the development of poetry, incorporating both playful and serious elements in your choreography. Actors. Engage in improvisational exercises where you transition between different styles of acting, embodying both serious and trivial characters. Perform scenes that highlight the evolution of dramatic form, incorporating elements of dialogue and characterization inspired by the development of tragedy. These exercises provide a direct application of Aristotle's insights, encouraging writers, composers, dancers, and actors to engage with the principles discussed in the summary. Through these practical activities, artists can explore the intricacies of imitation, harmony, and rhythm within their respective art forms, aligning their creative expressions with Aristotle's foundational concepts.